Here's something that will terrify you. Take away your phone, your Netflix, your constant stream of plans and people and distractions. Strip it all away. Now what's left? Just you. And thoughts you've been drowning out for years. Most people can't handle 30 seconds of that reality. They'd rather stay busy, stay distracted, stay anywhere but alone with themselves. Because being alone means facing the truth. And the truth is this: what occasion, you don't actually know who you are anymore. But what if I told you that this terror you feel, this fear of your own company, it's not warning you away from danger, it's pointing you toward freedom. You see, I've spent decades studying human behavior, watching people chase external validation like drug addicts chasing their next fix. And what I've discovered will shock you. The very thing you're avoiding, that quiet space where it's just you and your thoughts, that's where your real power lives. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No phone, no music, no distractions, just you and your inner world. Can you even remember? Most people can't. And that's the problem. Right now, as you listen to this, there's a part of you that wants to click away, to find something easier, something that doesn't require you to look inward. But stay with me, because what happens next could change everything. You know that feeling when everyone else is busy and you're left alone? That uncomfortable stirring in your chest? That restlessness? That's not loneliness. That's your soul trying to get your attention. It's been waiting patiently while you filled your life with everyone else's voices, everyone else's opinions, everyone else's needs. And it's getting tired of waiting. Think about the last time you made a big decision. Really think about it. Were you alone when the answer came to you? Or were you surrounded by well-meaning friends and family, each pulling you in different directions? I'll bet it was in a quiet moment, maybe in your car, maybe in the shower, maybe lying in bed at 3 a.m. That's not a coincidence. That's your inner wisdom finally getting a chance to speak. But here's what most people don't understand about solitude. It's not about being physically alone. You can be surrounded by people and still be in your own private space of awareness. And you can be completely alone and still be running from yourself. True solitude is about turning your attention inward. It's about becoming curious about your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own patterns. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first, because you're going to see things you don't like. You're going to see how much you seek approval from others, how much you change yourself to fit in, how often you abandon your own truth to avoid conflict. And that's going to hurt. Good. That pain is trying to teach you something. Let me tell you about a lady. She came to see me after her third failed relationship. Brilliant woman, successful career. But she couldn't figure out why her relationships kept falling apart. I give everything to them. She said, I'm always there for them. I never ask for anything. And there was the problem. She never asked for anything because she never took the time to figure out what she actually wanted. She was so busy being what everyone else needed that she lost touch with who she was underneath all those roles. Sound familiar? She was afraid of being alone because being alone meant facing the uncomfortable truth that she didn't really know herself. She had become an expert at reading other people's needs and neglecting her own. Every quiet moment felt like a threat because it might reveal how empty she felt inside. But here's what changed everything for her. And what could change everything for you? She started spending just 15 minutes a day in complete solitude. No agenda, no meditation app, no self-help books, just sitting with herself. Being curious about what came up. And what came up at first was panic. I don't know how to just be, she told me, I always need to be doing something, helping someone, fixing something. Exactly. That's the addiction. The addiction to external stimulation, to being needed, to being busy. It's a way of avoiding the deeper questions that solitude always brings up. Questions like, who am I when I'm not trying to impress anyone? What do I actually want from my life? What am I afraid of? What am I running from? These aren't comfortable questions. But they're the only questions that matter. You see, solitude forces you to confront the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. Between what you say you want and what you're actually choosing. Between your values and your behavior. And that gap, that's where your real growth happens. Most people spend their entire lives trying to manage other people's opinions of them, They become masterful actors, playing whatever role seems to get them the most approval. But actors need an audience. Take away the audience, and they panic. Because without someone to perform for, they don't know who they are. But you're not an actor. You're a human being with your own inner compass, your own values, your own dreams. And that compass only works when you get quiet enough to feel it. I want you to think about the people you admire most. The ones who seem to have this unshakable sense of themselves, the ones who don't get thrown off course by criticism or praise. What do they all have in common? They've spent time alone with themselves. They've done the inner work. They know the difference between their own voice and the voice of their conditioning. They can tell the difference between fear and intuition, between what they want and what they think they should want. And that knowing, that only comes from solitude. But let me warn you about something. The people in your life might not like it when you start spending more time alone. They might call you antisocial, selfish, weird. They might try to pull you back into the old patterns of constant availability and people-pleasing. Why? Because your growth threatens their comfort zone. When you start becoming more authentic, it highlights how much they're still performing. When you start setting boundaries, it forces them to confront their own. This is where it gets dangerous. This is where most people give up and go back to their old ways of being, because the external pressure feels more real than the internal calling. But what if I told you that this resistance is actually a sign you're going in the right direction? What if the discomfort of others is proof that you're finally choosing yourself? You have to understand something. Every time you abandon yourself to make someone else comfortable, you teach your nervous system that you're not safe to be yourself. You train yourself to scan the environment constantly for approval signals. You become hypervigilant about other people's moods and reactions, and that's exhausting. It's like living your life walking on eggshells, never quite knowing when you might step wrong and lose someone's acceptance. But solitude teaches you something revolutionary. It teaches you that you can be alone and be okay, that your worth doesn't depend on external validation, that you can trust your own judgment. And once you really get that, once you really feel it in your bones, everything changes. You stop chasing people who don't want to be caught. You stop settling for relationships that require you to shrink yourself. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop apologizing for taking up space. But here's what nobody tells you about this transformation. It's not always pretty. There will be days when the loneliness feels overwhelming, when you question whether this inner journey is worth it, when you wonder if maybe you were better off staying asleep. Those are the most important days. Those are the days when your old patterns are fighting hardest to pull you back. Your ego mind will tell you that you need to go back to the old ways of being. That growth is selfish, that you're becoming isolated and weird. Don't listen. That's just fear talking, fear of your own power, fear of what you might become if you really commit to knowing yourself. Because what you might become is someone who doesn't need constant reassurance. Someone who can make decisions from their center rather than from their wounds. Someone who attracts people who appreciate them as they are rather than people who need them to be someone else. And that person is worth the discomfort of growth. But let's talk about what solitude isn't. It's not about becoming a hermit. It's not about avoiding relationships or responsibilities. It's not about spiritual superiority or emotional numbness. True solitude is about creating space for your authentic self to emerge. It's about learning to be comfortable in your own skin. It's about developing a relationship with yourself that's so solid that external circumstances can't shake it. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a garden. For years, you've been so focused on what the neighbors think of your garden that you've never actually learned what grows well in your soil. You keep planting what looks good in magazines, what gets compliments from visitors, what fits the neighborhood aesthetic, but the plants keep dying. Or they grow but never flourish. And you can't figure out why. Solitude is like finally paying attention to your own soil, your own climate, your own natural rhythms. It's about learning what actually wants to grow in your unique environment rather than forcing what you think should grow. And once you start planting according to your own soil conditions rather than other people's opinions, everything starts to flourish. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally working with your nature instead of against it. This is what happens when you commit to regular solitude. You start to notice patterns in your thoughts that you've never seen before. You become aware of the stories you tell yourself, the assumptions you make, the beliefs you've never questioned. You might realize that you've been living your entire life trying to prove something to someone who died years ago, or that you've been making decisions based on fears that aren't even yours, or that you've been seeking love in places where love was never available. These realizations can be painful, but they're also liberating, because once you see a pattern, you can change it. Once you understand where a behavior comes from, you can choose something different. But you can't change what you can't see, and you can't see what you won't spend time looking at. This is why solitude is so threatening to your ego. Your ego has spent years building an identity, creating stories about who you are and why things happen the way they do. Solitude threatens those stories, and it asks uncomfortable questions. It shines light in dark corners. Your ego prefers the chaos of external stimulation to the clarity of inner stillness. It would rather have you scrolling through social media, comparing yourself to others, feeding your insecurities, than sitting quietly and discovering your own worth. And the more you've been avoiding solitude, the louder your ego will protest when you finally start seeking it. It will tell you you're wasting time, that you should be productive, that introspection is selfish and indulgent. But what your ego doesn't want you to discover is that everything you've been seeking outside yourself has been inside you all along. The peace you're looking for in relationships, the confidence you're trying to build through achievements, the love you're hoping to earn through people-pleasing, it's all already there, waiting for you to get quiet enough to notice. I remember working with a man named Atlas who hadn't been alone for more than 10 minutes in 20 years. He scheduled every moment of his day, meetings, workouts, social events, phone calls. When I asked him why, he said, "I'm just really social. I love being around people." But when we dug deeper, the truth was different. He was terrified of what he might discover if he stopped moving. He had built his entire identity around being helpful, being needed, being busy. The idea of just being himself, without any role to play or service to provide, felt like death. It took him months to work up to even 30 minutes of solitude. And what he discovered in those quiet moments changed his life. He realized he had been living someone else's version of success, making money in a career that drained him to pay for a lifestyle he didn't even enjoy, surrounded by people who only knew the performing version of himself. The real Atlas wanted something completely different, something quieter, something more meaningful, something aligned with his actual values rather than the values he thought he should have. But he could only hear that quiet voice when he stopped drowning it out with external noise. This is what solitude offers you, the chance to hear your own voice, to discover what you actually think, feel, want, and need, to separate your authentic desires from your conditioned responses. And yes, what you discover might require you to make changes. Big changes, changes that other people won't understand or support, changes that feel risky and uncertain. But here's what I know after decades of working with people who have made these changes. The regret of not becoming who you really are is far more painful than the fear of disappointing others. You can spend your whole life managing other people's expectations and never touch your own potential. You can be perfectly acceptable to everyone and completely lost to yourself. Or you can choose the more difficult path, the path of solitude, the path of self-discovery, the path of becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. But let me be clear about something. This isn't about becoming perfect. Solitude doesn't make you flawless. It makes you authentic. It helps you see your patterns, your triggers, your wounds, and that seeing is the first step toward healing. When you spend time alone with yourself, you start to notice things like how you talk to yourself when no one else is listening, how harsh your inner critic can be, how much energy you spend on worry and regret. You might discover that you're not very good company for yourself, that you treat yourself worse than you would treat a stranger, that you have a running commentary of criticism and judgment going on in your head all day long. Good. Now you know what you're working with. Now you can start to change the relationship you have with yourself. Because every other relationship in your life is a reflection of that primary relationship. If you don't like yourself, you'll attract people who don't really like you either. If you don't trust yourself, you'll be drawn to people who are untrustworthy. If you don't respect your own boundaries, you'll find yourself in relationships with people who don't respect them either. But when you develop a loving, respectful relationship with yourself through the practice of solitude, everything else starts to shift. You become less desperate for approval because you approve of yourself. You become less afraid of abandonment because you know you'll never abandon yourself. You start to see other people more clearly too, because you're not projecting your own unmet needs onto them. You're not trying to get them to fill the holes in your self-esteem. You're relating to them from a place of wholeness rather than emptiness, and that changes everything. Instead of relationships based on need and dependency, you can have relationships based on choice and appreciation. Instead of performing for love, you can simply be loved for who you are. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent commitment to spending time with yourself, to sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately reaching for distractions, to questioning your automatic thoughts instead of believing them without examination. Most people give up too early. They try solitude for a few days or weeks, get uncomfortable, and conclude it's not for them. They go back to their old patterns of busyness and external stimulation. But what they don't realize is that the discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is changing. Your nervous system has been programmed for chaos and stimulation. Of course, it's going to resist stillness at first. The key is to start small and be patient with yourself. 5 minutes of solitude is better than none. Sitting quietly in your car before you go into the house is better than immediately jumping into the evening routine. Taking a walk alone without your phone is better than constant connectivity. These small moments add up. They create space for your authentic self to emerge. They teach your nervous system that it's safe to be still, safe to be present, safe to be with yourself. And as that safety grows, you'll find yourself naturally seeking more solitude. Not because you're avoiding others, but because you're finally enjoying your own company. You'll start to notice the quality of your thoughts improving. Instead of the usual anxious chatter, you might find moments of genuine insight. Instead of worrying about what others think, you might discover what you actually think. You might have creative ideas that have nothing to do with productivity or achievement. You might remember dreams you had forgotten. You might feel emotions you've been numbing for years. All of this is information. All of this is you getting to know yourself. And the better you know yourself, the better choices you can make. Instead of reactively responding to life from your wounds and fears, you can consciously choose responses that align with your values and goals. Instead of being driven by unconscious patterns, you can create new patterns that serve you. But here's what might surprise you most about developing a regular solitude practice. The deeper you go into yourself, the more connected you feel to others. Not dependent on them, but genuinely connected. When you're not constantly seeking validation, you can actually see other people clearly. When you're not performing, you can appreciate their authentic selves. When you're not afraid of being alone, you can be present in relationships without the desperate energy of neediness. People will start responding to you differently too. They'll sense the change in your energy. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing yourself. The peace that comes from not needing to prove anything. The strength that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. Some people will be threatened by this change. They like the old version of you better, the one who was always available, always accommodating, always putting others' needs before your own. They might try to guilt you back into old patterns. This is a test. This is where you get to practice what you've learned in solitude. You get to choose your own truth over their comfort. You get to maintain your boundaries even when others pressure you to abandon them. And each time you choose yourself in these moments, you strengthen your relationship with your authentic self. You prove to your nervous system that you can be trusted to protect and care for yourself. This is how transformation happens. Not through grand gestures or dramatic changes, but through small, consistent choices to honor your own truth. Through daily practices of self-awareness and self-respect. Solitude gives you the space to practice these choices without external pressure. It's like a laboratory where you can experiment with being yourself, where you can try on different ways of thinking and being, without having to immediately defend or explain them to others. Over time, this experimentation becomes integration. The insights you have in solitude start showing up in your daily interactions. The peace you find in stillness starts permeating your whole life. You become someone who doesn't need drama to feel alive, who doesn't need crisis to feel important, who doesn't need chaos to feel engaged with life. You become someone who can be content with simplicity, who can find meaning in ordinary moments, Who can appreciate what you have instead of constantly wanting what you don't have? This is not about becoming passive or disengaged. It's about becoming choosy about where you put your energy. It's about learning to distinguish between what truly matters and what's just noise. When you know yourself deeply, you know what's worth your time and attention. You stop getting pulled into other people's dramas. You stop trying to fix problems that aren't yours to fix. You stop sacrificing your well-being for temporary approval. Instead, you become someone who contributes from overflow rather than emptiness. Someone who gives because you choose to, not because you need to be needed. Someone who loves others without losing yourself in the process. And this is the greatest gift you can give to the world. Not your people-pleasing, not your constant availability, not your willingness to abandon yourself for others' comfort, your authentic presence, your genuine truth, your real self. But to give this gift, you first have to unwrap it yourself. You have to spend the time alone that it takes to discover who you really are underneath all the roles and expectations and performances. This is not selfish. This is essential. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot love others truly if you do not love yourself. You cannot be honest with others if you are not honest with yourself. And the honesty that solitude brings can be shocking at first. You might discover that you've been living a life that looks good from the outside but feels empty from the inside. You might realize that you've been saying yes to opportunities that don't actually interest you and no to things that would bring you joy. You might find that you've been surrounding yourself with people who need you to be small in order to feel big themselves. Or that you've been choosing safety over growth, comfort over truth, approval over authenticity. These realizations can be overwhelming, but they're also liberating. Because once you see clearly what's not working, you can start making different choices. You can start saying no to commitments that drain you and yes to experiences that energize you. You can start spending time with people who appreciate your growth rather than people who need you to stay the same. You can start living from your own center rather than from other people's expectations. And that shift, that simple but profound shift, changes everything. Suddenly, you're not exhausted all the time because you're not constantly fighting against your own nature. You're not anxious all the time because you're not constantly worried about other people's reactions. You're not resentful all the time because you're not constantly abandoning yourself for others. Instead, you start to feel a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on external circumstances, a peace that doesn't require everything to go your way, a joy that comes from being aligned with your authentic self rather than from getting what you think you want. This is what solitude offers you. Not loneliness, but wholeness. Not isolation, but integration. Not emptiness, but fullness. But you have to be willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing who you are for a while. You have to be willing to let go of the familiar identity you've been carrying, even if it's not truly you. You have to be willing to disappoint some people in order to be true to yourself. You have to be willing to look foolish to others as you figure out what actually matters to you. Most people aren't willing to pay this price. They'd rather stay in familiar discomfort than risk the unknown territory of authentic living. They'd rather complain about their lives than take responsibility for changing them. But you're different. You're here listening to this because some part of you knows that there's more available to you. Some part of you is tired of living someone else's life. Some part of you is ready to discover who you really are when nobody else is watching. That part of you that's stirring right now, that's your soul calling you home. Home to yourself. Home to your own truth. Home to the life that's been waiting for you to have the courage to live it. And the doorway to that life is solitude. The willingness to spend time alone with yourself. The courage to face whatever you find there without immediately running away or covering it up with distractions. You don't need to know how to do this perfectly. You don't need to have it all figured out before you start. You just need to begin. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you can manage. Sit quietly, breathe, listen to what arises. Don't judge it or fix it or change it, just notice it. Be curious about your own inner world the way you might be curious about a friend's story. What thoughts keep repeating? What emotions are you avoiding? What dreams have you forgotten? What parts of yourself have you been hiding? This is not therapy, though it can be therapeutic. This is not meditation, though it can be meditative. This is simply the radical act of paying attention to yourself, of treating your inner life as worthy of your time and attention. And as you do this, as you make this commitment to knowing yourself, you'll start to notice changes, subtle at first, then more obvious. You'll become less reactive, more centered, more present. You'll start making decisions from a deeper place, not just from fear or habit or other people's opinions, but from your own inner knowing. You'll start trusting yourself in ways you never have before, and that trust will ripple out into every area of your life. Your relationships will deepen because you're bringing more of yourself to them. Your work will become more meaningful because it will be aligned with your values. Your daily life will feel more authentic because it will be expressions of who you really are. This is not a quick fix. This is not a life hack. This is a way of being that requires ongoing commitment and practice. But it's also the most important work you'll ever do, because everything else in your life flows from your relationship with yourself. When that relationship is strong, based on honesty and acceptance and respect, everything else becomes possible. When that relationship is weak, based on judgment and avoidance and criticism, everything else becomes a struggle. The choice is yours. You can keep filling your life with distractions and noise, hoping that somehow external things will give you the peace and fulfillment you're seeking. Or you can turn toward the one person who will be with you for your entire life, yourself, and start building a relationship worth having. Solitude is not something to be endured. It's something to be embraced. It's not empty time to be filled. It's sacred space to be honored. In that space, you'll find everything you've been looking for outside yourself. The love, the peace, the confidence, the clarity. It's all there, waiting for you to get quiet enough to notice. So I invite you to try something different. Instead of running from being alone, run toward it. Instead of filling every quiet moment with stimulation, let some of those moments be still. See what you discover about yourself when you're not performing for anyone. See what dreams arise when you're not busy managing everyone else's emotions. See what voice emerges when all the other voices finally quiet down. That voice has been waiting for you your whole life. It's been whispering truths that you've been too busy to hear. It's been pointing toward a life that you've been too distracted to notice. But it's still there, still waiting. Still believing in your potential to become who you really are, still ready to guide you home to yourself. All you have to do is listen. All you have to do is create the space for that voice to be heard. All you have to do is choose solitude over stimulation, depth over distraction, truth over performance. In a world obsessed with connection, the most revolutionary act you can commit is disconnection. From the noise, from the opinions, from the endless need to be somewhere other than where you are. Your authentic life isn't waiting for you out there. It's not hiding in your next relationship or your next achievement or your next distraction. It's waiting for you in the last place you'd think to look space, in the quiet space between your thoughts. Every master teacher, every enlightened soul, every person who's ever touched their true potential, they all discovered the same secret. The answers you seek don't live in the noise of the world. They live in the silence of your own being. That silence is calling you right now. Can you hear it? Or are you still too afraid to listen?